Everyone seems to have an idea about what autism is, whether that's because they have seen it represented on TV or in movies, or maybe they know of someone who has an autistic child. In reality, many of these characterisations are based on stereotypes and myths. So let's break down some of these myths together and discover what autism isn't. Hi, I'm Phil, a very late diagnosed autistic adult, and it's my goal to provide positive information and bust myths about autism. Last time, we looked at what autism is. This time, I want to take that one step further and break apart some of the myths so we can distinguish between what autism is and what it isn't. And this is important because this is where we find the outdated and damaging stereotypes that box autistic people into some subclass of humanity. First up, autism is not a disease. You can't catch autism. Autism is a lifelong difference. This means you are born autistic, and in fact, you will die autistic. And because autism is not a disease or illness, that also means you can't cure autism. And to be clear, there is nothing to cure. Organisations and politicians who advocate for a cure for autism are missing the point. We are not sick or damaged. As autistic people, we are whole and complete. The issue is not us. The issue is a world that does not accept difference and diversity of the human experience. These people advocating for some cure are not helping autistic people. They are making our lives harder by stigmatising our very existence. And they do it for their own gain, be that political or financial. As we have said, autism is a brain that works differently, and that is okay. In fact, it's more than okay, it's actually wonderful. Who wants to live in a society where everyone thinks the same way? It's the diversity of thoughts and experience that makes the world a better place. And to labour that point, this also means that autism is not a mental illness. And to clarify this further, there is a myth that autism can develop in infancy. To date, the evidence is firm that autism develops prenatally. Where the confusion arises is that the symptoms or traits of autism only become evident as a child moves through their early developmental stages. So while it may appear as though there is an onset of autism as the child develops, in reality, autism was present from birth. What is possible is that traumatic brain events or illness could cause neurological differences in the child that share overlapping symptoms or traits with autism. But these neurological conditions are distinct from autism. An extension of this is vaccines and medications do not cause autism. In spite of the current noise in politics about how vaccines or over-the-counter drugs can cause autism, there are no facts to back up these damaging claims. They are purely politically driven. Talk about the drug Tylenol or paracetamol causing autism is erroneous. And studies have comprehensively shown that this link is not credible and comes from a misunderstanding of a scientific study that documented some small association of Tylenol use with autism, but did not prove any causation of the link. In fact, in other studies, it was shown that by far the biggest link was genetics. By that I mean that it is much more likely that a child is autistic because either one of the parents are autistic, or there is autistic relatives in the ancestor chain. And pushing the Tylenol or vaccine narrative as a cause is heaping blame and guilt on the parents of autistic children. This is cruel and based on a lie. There are many good videos refuting the Tylenol connection to autism. I will link some in the description. Likewise, autism is not caused by bad or absent parenting. As we have stated, autism is a neurodevelopmental disability, which means it occurs in the earliest developmental stages of life, well before parenting of any sort has an influence. In other words, autism develops in the prenatal developmental stage. Another wrong and damaging stereotype about autism is that autistic people are intellectually disabled or have low IQ. This stereotype is a hangover from some of the earliest research into autism, where it was first observed in small intellectually disabled boys in institutions. We have moved on a long way from this very limited understanding of autism. The fact is that autistic people can and do have IQ scores from across the entire range of the intelligence spectrum. A variation on this myth is that autistic people who are non-verbal or speak minimally are intellectually disabled. This also is not correct. The fact is that non-verbal autistic people can communicate, but do so in different ways. Being non-speaking does not equate to a lack of intelligence. What is more probable here is that the IQ test itself biases against non-verbal individuals, underestimating their IQ score. Non-verbal autistic people can have the same range of intelligence as the rest of the population. And further to this is the fact that autistic people who normally do speak may have times where they are also unable to speak due to overwhelm in certain situations. And I've experienced this myself many times to varying degrees. This leads on to the next myth, that is, all autistic people are geniuses. This one can come from characterizations in TV shows that depict the autistic character as having genius IQ and doing amazing things because of that. This characterization is maybe more a representation of giftedness, which is a separate neurodivergence, whereby the gifted individual has a mind that is extra perceptive, which can lead to genius in certain areas. What is true, however, is that there can be some overlap between giftedness and autism. In other words, some autistic people are also gifted. And then there is the slightly different but similar stereotype that autistic people all have some superpower. Again, this comes from movies where the main character, while seemingly has an intellectual disability, also has incredible abilities. Examples here are the movie Rain Man, where the main character can memorise phone books or playing cards in a casino, and also the movie Shine, where the main character has an amazing ability with the piano. Both of these are examples of savantism, which again is a different neurodivergence to autism. But again, there may be some degree of overlap between savantism and autism, which is where the confusion starts. So some savants may also be autistic, but not all autistics are savants. Okay, so now we move on to one of the most stupid stereotypes about autism, and that is, we're all a little bit autistic, or we're all on the spectrum somewhere. No, there is not a shred of truth in this. It diminishes the daily struggles that autistic people face. You are either autistic or you are not autistic. There is no such thing as being a little bit autistic. It's like a middle-aged man at a Christmas dinner who has just eaten way too much turkey in a disgraceful display of gluttony, turning to a younger pregnant dinner guest and while patting his bloated and stuffed stomach saying, "We're all a little bit pregnant." No, you're not. You're just a greedy fat. Yes, many people might be introverted or a bit quirky or maybe like things done in a certain way. In short, many people may have some individual traits that might in some small way mirror a singular autistic trait. But being autistic means these traits are often overwhelming and constant. In short, are disabling, which is a long way past just being a bit quirky. There is a long list of criteria that needs to be met to be assessed as autistic. It's not just about a few isolated quirks. Likewise, saying we are all on the spectrum somewhere is a complete misunderstanding of what the autism spectrum really is. It's not a linear scale of being a little bit autistic at one end or massively autistic at the other end. It's more a representation of the wide diversity of experience of autistic people and represents differences in challenges and abilities within the autistic experience. This is sometimes represented on a wheel, like a colour wheel, rather than a linear scale like a rainbow. Mine looks something like this, showing where I struggle and where I excel. So going back to these phrases, just don't say them. They cause distress to the autistic person and magnify the obvious lack of understanding about autism in the world around us. Another misconception about autism is that it just affects boys. Again, this comes from the fact that the early research was focused on boys in institutions. While statistically boys are about twice as likely to be diagnosed as girls, this does not mean that boys are twice as likely to be autistic than girls, only that they are twice as likely to be diagnosed. The main reason for this disparity is in the difference in the way boys and girls typically socialise. Girls are more adept at copying each other, which leads to more comprehensive masking in girls, causing lower rates of diagnosis or later diagnosis. This can also mean that autistic girls have special interests that seem more aligned with their peers, with the difference being in the depth of knowledge and focus on those interests. The real rates of autism between males and females are probably closer to parity, which means a lot of undiagnosed females in the community. And leading on from this myth, we have its companion: autism just affects children. While there are more children diagnosed autistic than adults, it does not follow that autism just affects children, or even that autism is more prominent in children. The reason for this disparity is that diagnosis is so much more advanced now than it was in previous decades. So autistic children are much more likely to be identified now than in previous decades. This also means that for many, many autistic adults, the possibility of being diagnosed as children was practically zero. So we have whole generations of undiagnosed autistic adults in the community. This is where the statistical variation exists. It's not that there are less autistic adults proportionally than children, just many times less who have been diagnosed. This is changing as diagnostic criteria becomes more refined and more general awareness about autism through podcasts like this and many more become available. But there are still so many undiagnosed autistic adults struggling through life. This increased awareness and identification leads to the next myth: there is an autism epidemic. As stated above, better diagnostic processes and better awareness accounts for the increase in numbers. There are clear political agendas at play around this false narrative of an autism epidemic, but that is the topic for a whole other video. So to explore that more deeply, please check out my podcast on that topic also. Moving on, a very common and wrong belief is that autistic people lack empathy or are emotionless. This one comes out of the fact that autistic people often have a different way of both processing and expressing empathy and emotions. Because autistic people process social interactions differently, this can lead to a misalignment in how we understand the other person's thoughts, actions, and feelings. This is cognitive empathy. This difference in cognitive empathy can lead to unexpected responses, which may be interpreted as a lack of empathy. But on the other side of the coin, autistic people often have a very strong emotional empathy, which means we feel other people's emotions in strong and sometimes overwhelming ways, which actually makes us highly empathic. Likewise for emotions, autistic people often feel emotions strongly, but it is in the expression of those emotions that we may differ. We may struggle to either identify or name our emotions. This is called alexithymia. And for more detail on alexithymia, please refer to my podcast on that subject also. Alexithymia may mean we have a strong physical response to our emotions, but not understand what the emotion is or how the physical manifestations link back to the emotional root cause. Another misconception about autistic people is we cannot live independently. This is largely untrue, and many, if not most, autistic people do live independent lives. The caveat here is that by definition, autistic people do require support in our daily lives. But the amount of support required will vary from individual to individual and vary over time. For me, I lived alone in my own house for several decades as an adult before getting married. In looking back through that period, I can now recognise that I did get substantial support from both family and friends, but I was nonetheless independent. And in my current situation, I get a huge amount of support from my wife, but also continue to get support from family and friends. This is what community means. And granted, some autistic people may not have those support networks around them, so independent living may be more difficult. For other autistic people, the level of support required may be greater, which might make living independently more challenging or even unachievable. But whether it is possible will be up to each individual situation. This myth is sometimes taken one step further and becomes autistic people can't form romantic attachment or get married. This is absolutely wrong. Many autistic people live happily married lives with both other neurodivergent spouses, but also with neurotypical spouses. Autistic people may have many common qualities that make for great life companions. Where this myth may have taken hold might stem from many of the other myths already mentioned, such as perceived lack of empathy or supposed inability to live independently. What may in fact be more relevant is that because we socialise and communicate differently, we may find it more difficult to find people that get us. And when we do find ourselves in relationships, sometimes those differences may lead to a breakdown of those relationships. Added to this is the fact that because autistic people generally need support in different ways to neurotypical people, we may stay in the family home longer than our peers, which may also affect dating. But the truth is that once we find the right person, we can make loving, supportive, and very often truly loyal life partners. A list of myths and misconceptions about autism would not be complete without this one. Autistic people can't make eye contact. Okay, this very popular myth has some limited truth in that many autistic people find eye contact uncomfortable, as making eye contact can feel way too personal. This discomfort may mean the autistic person looks away when communicating, as the distraction of holding eye contact may make it impossible to also hear and process what is being said. Some autistic people may overcompensate by making laser-focused eye contact, and many other autistic people will make flawless eye contact. For some, this will still be distracting, but for others it will be much more comfortable. Sometimes we may be choreographing our eye contact constantly as the conversation progresses, trying very hard to manufacture normal. This is part of the masking that many autistic people do to fit in. And as an aside here, some autistic people may also struggle to refer to people by name in greetings or conversations, as this can also feel odd or too personal. Alright, so we've had a very brief look at what autism isn't in this podcast. There is so much more detail that we could go into, but instead of doing that here and getting bogged down, I want to leave this as more of an overview. To go into more detail on each of these topics, I've been working on producing podcasts focusing on each of the individual aspects. So I urge you to explore those topics in more detail there. All these videos are located in my autism playlist, which I will leave linked in the description and at the end of this video. And maybe the most important point to end on is that every autistic person is different. This means we will all have a different mix of traits, strengths, challenges, experiences, needs and desires from each other. So if you don't resonate with everything I speak about, that does not mean you're not autistic, just that your experience is different. So if you think you might be autistic, then keep exploring and understanding yourself. You are worth the effort of doing so. And be aware you will encounter deniers on the journey, but don't let them turn you from your path. They only know the stereotypes, and autism is anything but a stereotype. Go well. See you next time. Bye for now.